Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Leftovers, Season 2, Episodes 5 through 7. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review Season 2 of The Leftover in batches. So I have to give a spoiler warning for Season 2 of The Leftovers up to Episode 7. So we'll start with Episode 5, No Room at the Inn. The episode where Matt Jameson desperately tries to find a way to get his wife back into Miracle after being locked out. So I'm not going to beat around the bush, I'm just going to come right out and say it. This episode was by a country mile my least favorite episode of the season thus far, and quite possibly my least favorite episode of the entire series. The plot of this episode just felt unbelievably contrived, and parts of it were being weird just for the sake of being weird, and it just came off as pretentious. That being said, there were aspects of this episode I did really like. So first off, this episode reminds me a lot of a bad episode of Lost. More specifically, it reminds me of that episode Further Instructions where John Locke inexplicably appeared in the jungle after the hatch implosion and then went on a mission to save Mr. Echo from the polar bears. And the reason I say this is because the whole mission Matt had to take his wife back to Jordan just felt incredibly contrived. All the stakes and all the obstacles in their way felt incredibly fake. Like it was obvious there was a writer behind this thinking, ooh, how do I raise the stakes? And it really took me out of the reality of the show and made it very apparent that I was watching a scripted television show, which is never a good thing. I want shows where I feel invested and involved in the reality of what's going on, not consciously aware that there's some douchebag writing a story trying to raise the stakes and get me invested. The whole thing with Matt's wife talking to him and telling him that she needs to get back or she'll die, it was so reminded me of Lost. It really seemed like something it would do. You know, I love Lost. I think it's an amazing show, but it reminded me of the worst aspects of Lost, like the polar bear episode. And all the stakes felt so contrived. Like, I really don't buy that they don't have contingencies in place for someone who lives there to get in with when the wristband has been stolen. Apparently, it's a fairly common occurrence, and on top of that, they conveniently came up with the rule that you have to have lived there for 6 months, at least 6 months, in order to vouch for someone, conveniently eliminating Kevin and Nor, meaning they have to turn to John for help, which is just so contrived. But on top of that, even going by these rules, I find myself wondering, why the hell doesn't Matt simply call someone from his church? He took over services while the other guy was gone, and he made quite a few friends, quite a few followers, good Christians, people that know him. I'm sure if he called one of them, one of the many followers at the church, they would gladly come and vouch for him. But of course they couldn't do that because that would ruin this fake plot about Matt trying to sneak back into town. But as I was watching, I couldn't help being distracted by that. It's just call someone from the church, god damn it. But also, the way the little camp community outside of town behaved was just pretentious wankery. I know Tom Peretta and Damon Lindelof said specifically about Season 2 that they tried to leave as much open to interpretation as possible. Well, I'll tell you how I interpret the scene where the guy asks Matt to whack him with the stick and yell Brian as he does so. I interpret it as pretentious wankery. That's how I interpret it. Again, they're going full Lindelof here and being weird just for the sake of being weird, and I couldn't possibly be less impressed. I'm sure some people were theorizing on why the guy wanted him to scream Brian, but I could not possibly care less. It's like, what's the deal with Jack's tattoos? Who the hell cares? It's just stupid. Weird for the sake of being weird. And then there's the thing with the stockades. Totally unrealistic, totally contrived, totally predictable that Matt would climb in them at the end. When he did that, I just sighed and rolled my eyes so hard. It's just ridiculous. That being said, as I said, there were aspects of this episode that I really did like. So the whole episode wasn't a wash. I liked the storyline about Mary being pregnant, and I liked how they explored more of the incident Matt told Nora about in the previous episode about how Mary was awake for one night. And I like how they never actually show us that scene, and we only have Matt's description of it to go on. It brings a welcome sense of ambiguity to it, but most of all, I love the interactions with Matt and John in this episode. I like how they further explored how John has a problem with anyone claiming there's anything miraculous about Miracle, and he has this creepy facade of being friendly when really he's judging you and evaluating you. I thought it was great how Matt was so desperate to get in, he was willing to go along with John, but he couldn't help but make a remark about how something must have happened to him, which I think was a very perceptive observation. But most of all, I love the confrontation Matt has with John at the end of the episode where Matt's like, well, fuck it. I'm not going to lie to appease you. I'll just leave. And he said that once Mary wakes up, then they'll talk. That was really awesome and a great way to end the episode. So yeah, there were things about it I really liked. So my rating for No Room at the end is a 5 average. The scenes between John and Matt were so good I couldn't give this episode less than a 5, but the plot was so contrived and the weirdness was so pretentious I couldn't give this episode more than a 5 either. So after that, we got Episode 6, Lens. This was a return to form to the high quality I've come to expect from Season 2, as this was an episode that followed Nora and Erica's points of views, that explored a lot more about the Murphys and the town in general, while at the same time gave us some great callbacks to Season 1, reminding us of Nora's job and exploring more of her current state of mind. I've heard some people were confused about why Nora threw a rock through the Murphys' windows. In fact, some people didn't even realize it was Nora, or were coming up with false reasons why she would do it, where I thought the reason was obvious. She was pissed at John for not willing to help her brother and leaving him stranded, and I think that's all there was to it. She was going about it in a more passive-aggressive way, as when Kevin was surprised that she wanted to go to the fundraiser to support them after what he did to Matt, Nora was like, no, it's all good, but then she waits until night and throws a rock through the window. One thing I really love about this episode is that we see it through Nora's perspective, and even the stuff with Kevin. Has Kevin's totally engrossed in his own problems, which are quite big. He isn't even aware what's going on with Nora. However, Nora's the same way. She's so concerned about these lens theories or the possibility of another departure occurring, she doesn't even notice Kevin is slowly losing his mind. It's great how we never actually see Patty in this episode because it's all from Nora's perspective. I was actually a little concerned that Nora was not quite as interesting in Season 2 as she was in Season 1, as she was by far my favorite character in Season 1, but this episode put those fears to rest. It was an interesting way to start the episode with the scientist bothering Nora with taking readings and asking her questions. Her reaction to him was pretty expected and pretty awesome. But I was actually taking those scientists seriously until they called and started talking about the demon Azrael, which was quite funny. And of course Nora had the same reaction, because after hearing about the lens theory, she was starting to believe it. And but as soon as they brought up the demon Azrael, that immediately made her think the whole thing was bullshit, which of course made her happy, which is why she was laughing. So I heard some people reviewing this episode talking about the likelihood of the lens theory, and some of them thought it was quite possible. However, I was a bit disappointed that they didn't bring up the geography theory brought up in episode 2, because that was the theory I was kind of invested in, and it's the one I think Nora believed most in, because it's what led her to move to Miracle and to feel safe there. But the lens theory kind of threw all that into question. However, what I think, and I think Nora came to the same conclusion by the end of the episode, is that it's just a sign that no one has the slightest clue what caused the departure, and everyone's just grasping at straws. Scientists will have their theories, but they're all conflicting and nothing's really concrete. This speaks to the science versus faith argument that was explored a lot in Lost. Everyone is coming up with their own reasons for why departure happened, and they simply can't accept that it's something that will never be explained. This was explored more in the fundraiser scene when Erica has her breakdown and explodes at everyone, and we learn why the guy goes around killing goats and why the woman wears a wedding dress all the time. It's their own way of coping with the departure by trying to warn it off. I love how she called John out for beating up psychics and people who make miraculous claims, but letting the goat slayer and the wedding dress girl get away with it. This, of course, also explores their relationship, which seems kind of perfect in the first couple of episodes, but it's actually quite troubled. And I absolutely love that scene at the end of the episode that brought Nora and Erica together as they were going through similar shit, where Nora tried to convince Erica it wasn't her fault and saying that she was stupid and self-centered for even thinking that it was. What Nora was really doing was trying to convince herself of this. So another interesting thing to talk about is the bird story, as I heard some theories that the reason the girls disappeared was because of Erica's wish, that because she wished Evie would be okay without her, she disappeared, as in a way making her okay without Erica, which is what Erica thought. It has a sort of George R.R. Martin ring to it, how prophecies can be misinterpreted and end up biting you in the ass. Because assuming for the moment the bird thing is magic, then her intentions in using it that way just backfired horrendously. However, I don't think that's the case because this isn't George R.R. Martin, this is Damon Lindelof. I think Nora's right, and Erica was blaming herself irrationally the same way Nora did when her family disappeared. I think it's looking likely we may never get an answer to what happened to those girls, but we'll see. But I love the confrontation Nora and Erica had, as when Nora said she was being self-centered, Erica turned it right around on her, and the way the episode ended with Kevin's confession, and then all of a sudden Erica throws a rock through the window, stands right there, making it clear it was her, and that she knew that it was Nora who did it to their house, and then we cut the credits to the song "I Am a Rock." That was just so great. So as for my rating for the episode, I've gone back and forth on whether to give this episode a 9 or a 10, as I'm pretty torn. I'm tempted to give it a 9.5, but I promised myself I'd never do half points, and I forced myself to go one way or the other. So my rating for Lens is a 9 excellent, but I damn near gave it a 10. It was a great episode that explored the lore of the town more, and Nora and Erica's characters, and drew some nice parallels between them, and the way they came together at the end was just amazing. So, lastly, we come to episode 7, A Most Powerful Adversary. Even saying the name of this episode gives me chills. It was so amazing. So the episode begins with Nora leaving Kevin, and I know a lot of people were really upset with Nora for doing this, but me, I was more disappointed in the writers for having her do it. It seemed slightly out of character for her, at least at first, because in episode 2 they were really open with each other, and when Kevin told her about what he did to Patty and how he had no memory of taking her out there, she seemed okay with it and confessed how she'd hire prostitutes to shoot her while she was wearing a bulletproof vest. So she thought she was just as fucked up as he was. So given all the shenanigans she was going through with thinking that she was a Lens, I would have thought she would have been a bit more understanding. But at the same time, it does make some sense that she's busy dealing with her own things to deal with someone who is going full-blown crazy, and that she simply can't handle it at the moment. At any rate, I felt the relationship dynamic between the two of them in this episode was portrayed extremely well. It was really realistic and powerful. But most of all was Kevin's struggle for his sanity, which was really building to something all season long, and it finally comes to a head. In fact, it started in season 1 when he was having all the the blackouts. But Patty's constant talking was finally getting to him, and of course the parallels to his father are pretty apparent and really interesting as well. I think the question I addressed in my last review about whether or not Patty was real or Kevin is simply delusional is a very interesting question to ponder that was explored more in this episode but not explained. I'm almost hoping that they never fully explain it. I kind of like how this is left open to interpretation. I'm still on the camp that she is real. Some of the things his father said in season 1 really led me to believe there was an intelligent force at play here and that he wasn't just crazy. But of course, they toyed with us a bit in this episode. Some refer to it as Lindelof trolling us because in season 1, Kevin's father told him he had a purpose, so when he asked Patty what she wanted him to do and she started to tell him the story about an artifact recovered in Cairo, that of course made me think about the National Geographic magazine his father emphasized, where I believe was about a dig in Cairo, and I expected that this mystery would never be touched on again. So when she first brought it up, I was like, oh my god, they're getting back to this mystery. But of course, as soon as she said she wanted him to drink his own cum, I knew she was full of shit. But that was kind of a funny scene. So finally, we found out about Mr. X, who I forgot to mention in my previous reviews, but was a pretty strange character. He was another case where I thought Lindelof was just being weird for the sake of being weird, but turns out they had bigger plans for him, as he has the ability to read people and displays an almost psychic qualities. And I'm talking about John's father. The actor who played him played Mr. X on The X-Files, who was a reoccurring character that fed Mulder information from time to time but wasn't to be trusted. I just happened to be rewatching The X-Files at the time in preparation for a review I'll be doing, so he's still fresh in my mind as Mr. X, so I can't help but think of him as Mr. X. Anyway, we saw him in the first couple of episodes being weird to Kevin and Nora. He seemed to know things about them, which made me think he had some sort of abilities. And in the previous episode, we found out he was Michael's grandfather and that John had shot him. There was some debate whether he was Erica's father or John's, but I knew he was John's because I doubted that John would shoot Erica's father. It seemed more likely he would shoot his own. However, originally I thought that John shot him because he was being all weird and acting all psychic-like, but apparently this happened before the departure, so John wouldn't have any reason to be all sensitive with people who pretended to display psychic abilities. Anyway, we get a pretty big revelation that Kevin had seen him the night of the earthquake and that Mr. X told him the only way to get rid of Patty was to kill himself, which is why Kevin tried to do it. And it was pretty chilling the way he said the earthquake stopped him must mean that he has a most powerful adversary. And then there's the thing with John tricking Kevin into getting the handprint, and you can just tell that John suspects him. Just the way he said, oh look, another innocent man exonerated. You can tell he's full of shit. John is just such a creepy guy with his nice guy facade. It makes his character all the more interesting. I'm pretty sure he will find out it was Kevin's handprint, and this will bring things to a head in the future. But getting back to the science versus faith thing, because I think this was even more present in this episode as everything came down to, do you believe in special circumstances that science can't explain, or is it all just bullshit? That's the kind of struggle John is going through, as he firmly is against any abnormal stuff and thinks it's all bullshit. And so the question is Kevin's hallucinations real or delusions? His conversations with Lori would seem to suggest it's just hallucinations and he's just crazy. She makes a pretty good point about how the reasons he never sees Patty when she's around is because that she could disprove that she exists because she knows information about the real Patty. Then again, Mr. X seems to know things about him and Nora, and he couldn't possibly know, and he seems to know all about what he's going through. And then we get another revelation, or at least a follow-up, where Laurie says outright that Tommy was lying about his abilities to give magical hugs, and they just came up with it to appease people. But Tommy couldn't take lying anymore. Most people might take this at face value, but I'm taking it with a grain of salt because we're just hearing it from her perspective. I still think it's possible that she may think that this story he told about meeting Wayne is bullshit, but really it isn't. And the reason I suspect this might be the case is because in Tommy's story about meeting Wayne, he talked about how Wayne told him where to take the baby, and that seemed irrelevant to everything else, especially as far as that particular group was concerned, and it seems to explore more of why he dropped the baby off to Kevin. So I think it's possible he told Laurie that the story was bullshit, but really it wasn't. Again, this gets back to the science versus faith argument. Is there really such a thing as magical hugs, or is it complete nonsense? I don't think any of these things will be resolved by the end of the season, and in fact, I think they're kind of more powerful if they're left open-ended. But of course, Kevin was forced to make a choice between science and faith. Does he believe Laurie that it's all in his head, or does he believe Mr. X that he has a most powerful adversary? I think at first he believed Laurie, which is why he brought her back to his house. But after the phone call with Nora that just drove him over the edge, and he was desperate to believe that Mr. X could cure him of all of his problems so he could go back to being with Nora. And this kind of parallels Tommy's magic hugs and what Laurie was saying about it, how people wanted an easy solution. They didn't want the reality. They wanted to believe that there was a magical, quick fix, which is exactly what happened to Kevin, as he wanted to believe Mr. X could cure him. So finally, let's talk about the big, shocking ending that was absolutely awesome. I was completely blown away by it. So I kind of knew that Mr. X wouldn't revive him. I mean, I had some doubts because I didn't think the show would kill off Kevin, but when he just spilled that antidote on the ground, I wasn't a tad bit surprised. Patty made a good point that Kevin didn't really know him very well, and he was trusting him very quickly, and they seemed, there's just something about him that just seemed a bit off. I didn't really trust him, probably because, well, he's Mr. X, and trust no one, Mr. Mulder. But anyway, when he shot himself, I was totally shocked. I did not see that coming at all. And of course, Michael was there to immediately drag Kevin's body away, and we saw before Kevin showed up, Michael was very upset and crying, so it seemed obvious he knew what Mr. X was planning on doing. But we still have no idea what the fuck happened. Why did Mr. X decide not to give Kevin the cure and instead shot himself in the head? And of course, the huge question on everyone's mind is Kevin dead? I wouldn't really put it past the show to kill Kevin off, because in a way his storyline has kind of run its course with Patty, and Laurie is now in position to take over and be involved with the family. But I'm leaning towards him being alive. We don't know for certain he is dead, because we've only been told that the poison was deadly by Mr. X, who we know lies, so is an unreliable narrator. Or it's possible that the reason he shot himself was because that's actually what he needed to do in order to save Kevin. He just didn't tell Kevin about it and made up some story about an antidote because he knew Kevin would never go along with it. As I said, Mr. X has displayed some abilities, so it seems like he does know more than what is natural. However, I think it's more likely that, again, this will remain something that's unexplained and audience members will be left to guess. When Kevin survives, was it because he wasn't given enough poison, or was it because Mr. X shooting himself somehow saved him? I do hope that they do explain why Mr. X shot himself, or at least give a possible explanation for it, as Michael obviously knows something about it. Either way, I do believe Kevin will live and that Patty will be gone, but that's just my guess. So my rating for a Most Powerful Adversary is a 10 the best. An absolutely amazing episode from start to finish. Some of the best television I've seen in a long time. That totally had me convinced that The Leftovers is one of the best shows on television and is something truly special. And I'm pretty sold that season 2 has far surpassed season 1 in terms of quality. But we still have 3 episodes left in the season, but I have high hopes for them. So that's it for my review of The Leftovers Season 2 episodes 5 through 7. After episode 10 airs, I'll be back here to review episodes 8, 9, and 10, the final 3 episodes of the season, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.